Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are stepping into something a bit different, something we're calling a crisis in perception.
Hmm.
Usually when we pick up a biography, we're looking for the story of a person, their life, their loves, their losses, the usual narrative.
Right, the human story.
Exactly. But today we're doing something uh, radically different. We are looking at a massive subject, maybe the most massive subject in all of American literature. But we aren't looking at him as a man.
No, we're not. We are looking at him as a system, or maybe more accurately, as an institutional design problem.
We are tackling Mark Twain, A Life by Ron Powers. But, and I want to be really, really clear about this right from the top, we are not here to talk about a guy named Samuel Clemens who wore a white suit, smoked cigars, and, wrote about rafts.
No, we are here to analyze the machinery, the actual, gears and belts of 19th century America to see how it manufactured a product. And that product was called Mark Twain.
That's a crucial distinction. It's almost like he's a brand name that emerged from a factory.
He is. And if you look at the source material from Ron Powers, he presents Clemens not as some lone genius just acting in a vacuum, but as a figure who was formed at the violent intersection of frontier culture, evangelical Protestantism, racial hierarchy, and the explosion of print capitalism.
It sounds almost industrial when you put it like that.
It was industrial. We're looking at
Yeah.
the factory floor of American identity. The core structural claim that's sort of embedded in this biography is that literary identity in the 19th century wasn't just expressive.
It wasn't just about feelings.
Not at all. It was produced. It was the output of a system that rewarded vernacular authenticity, controversy, and maybe most of all, moral spectacle.
So our mission today is to dismantle that machinery. We want to see the blueprints. You want to understand the inputs, the processing power, and the final output. And honestly, when you view Mark Twain this way as this emergent property of a chaotic system, it changes everything. It changes how you read Huckleberry Finn, it changes how you understand his bankruptcy, and it really changes how you understand the celebrity culture we're all living in today.
Exactly. We're going to see a sequence, and it's a sequence we come back to again and again. Design determines incentives, and incentives determine outcomes.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've organized this whole deep dive into a kind of roadmap of the Mark Twain system. We're going to start with the inputs. That's Hannibal, the river, and the biological cost of doing business.
Right. Then we'll move to the network, which is this kind of 19th century internet known as the newspaper exchange.
Then the interface, which
Yeah.
is how this specific architecture of humor actually functioned as a political tool.
And finally, the feedback loop, how money, debt, and the whole subscription market basically trapped him inside his own creation.
It's a tragedy and a comedy all wrapped up in a very aggressive business plan.
That's the perfect way to put it.
Let's start at the beginning then. Section 1, Institutional Inputs. Hannibal, Missouri. Now, I think for most people, Hannibal is the ultimate nostalgic setting.
Oh, absolutely. The Eden myth.
Right. It's white picket fences, rolling hoops down the street, bare feet, endless summers. It's basically the Disney version of America.
It is. But Ron Powers just dismantles that almost immediately. He paints this picture of the Mississippi River not as some scenic backdrop for a boy's adventure, but as economic theater.
Economic theater. I love that phrase. It implies there's a performance happening, but the reality underneath is all about cold, hard cash.
And you have to understand the scale of the river in the 1830s and 40s. It wasn't just a body of water, it was the timeline of the world. Powers highlights this huge technological shift that was happening right when Sam Clemens was a boy.
We're talking about the steamboat.
We're moving from the era of the flatboat, which, just drifted downriver with the current, to the era of the steamboat, Robert Fulton's Clermont.
That changed everything.
Everything. The steam engine changed the river from a one-way street into a two-way commercial superhighway. Suddenly, the river was carrying tobacco, hemp, pork, whiskey, all of it away from Hannibal, and it was bringing back cash, manufactured goods, and what Powers calls floating humanity.
That is such a vivid image, floating humanity. It makes me think of just this parade of characters drifting past his front door.
And that's exactly what it was. For young Sam Clemens, this wasn't just scenery. This was his first real exposure to a global communication system. Hannibal's a node in a massive network. He saw trappers coming down from the north, merchants coming up from New Orleans, charlatans, gamblers, and of course, enslaved people being transported.
The whole world was coming to him on that river.
It was, but this system had a cost. A biological cost. And this is where the deep dive gets a little dark, because the river didn't just carry money, it carried death.
This is one of the most striking connections Ron Powers makes in the book, and it really justifies this whole systems approach we're taking.
It really does. We have to talk about the death of Sam's sister, Margaret.
She died very young, right?
She was only 9, and she died of what they called bilious fever. Now, in the 19th century, bilious fever was just a catch-all term. They thought it was caused by miasmas, bad air coming off the swamps.
Right, bad smells causing disease.
But looking back with modern medical knowledge, we know it was almost certainly yellow fever.
Okay, so she gets sick, that's tragic, but it was common on the frontier. So why is this a systems issue?
Because of the vector. Yellow fever is a viral hemorrhagic disease. It attacks the liver, it causes jaundice, hence the yellow, and internal bleeding. But the virus itself doesn't just, float in the wind.
It needs a delivery mechanism.
It needs a taxi.
A mosquito.
Specifically, the Aedes aegypti mosquito.
Okay, I'm following you.
And here's the kicker. The Aedes aegypti is not native to Missouri. It's not even native to North America. It is an African insect.
Oh, wait. Wow.
It's an African insect, and it breeds in still stagnant water.
So how on earth does an African mosquito get to a small town in Missouri in 1839?
It takes the exact same route as the economy. Imagine a slave ship departing from West Africa. It's this horrific environment, dark, humid, just packed with human misery. But on deck or down in the hold, there are water casks.
For drinking water.
Barrels of drinking water that just sit there undisturbed for weeks during the Atlantic crossing.
It's an incubator.
It is the perfect nursery for the Aedes aegypti. The mosquitoes breed in the casks. The ship docks in New Orleans or maybe the Caribbean to sell its human cargo. The adult mosquitoes fly out. They find new breeding grounds in the rain barrels and puddles on the wharves of New Orleans.
And then the steamboats come.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The steamboats, the engines of commerce, they dock in New Orleans to pick up sugar, molasses, and enslaved people. The mosquitoes just hop on board. They ride the economic theater right up the Mississippi River, stopping at every little town along the way.
So when that steamboat docks in Hannibal, it's not just offloading goods. It's not just offloading news. It's offloading the biological agent that kills Sam Clemens' sister.
Precisely. The peculiar institution of slavery literally imported the disease vector. The commercial network of the slave trade and the river economy were structurally entangled with the personal tragedy of the Clemens family.
Wow.
Margaret's death wasn't just bad luck. It was a byproduct of the economic system they were living in.
That is absolutely chilling. It completely shatters that innocent frontier myth. It means you can't separate the economy from the biology, from the tragedy. They're all just one knotted system.
And that knot tightened around the Clemens family in other ways, too, specifically financially. Because if the river was the engine of the region, the Clemens family was constantly running on fumes.
Let's talk about Marshall Clemens, Sam's father. He's such a fascinating, tragic figure. He seems like a man who was, almost allergic to success.
He was a man of high principles, very stiff demeanor, and just terrible business instincts. But he fell into a very specific frontier trap. The Tennessee land.
Oh, the Tennessee land. In the book, this takes on an almost mythical quality. It's like the one ring of the family.
It really is. It functioned like a curse disguised as a blessing. So Marshall had purchased about 75,000 acres of land in Tennessee for just a fraction of a cent per acre.
A huge amount of land.
Huge. And he was convinced, absolutely certain, that civilization would eventually rush in, the land would yield timber or iron or coal, and the family would be millionaires.
It was a boundless wealth fantasy.
It was. And Powers points out that this functioned as a psychological crutch for the family. No matter how poor they were, and they were often destitute, they were technically rich because of the Tennessee land. It allowed them to maintain this sense of aristocratic pride, even when they couldn't pay the grocer.
It reminds me of people today who hold on to, like, a worthless stock or a crypto coin, convinced it's going to go to the moon, so they don't bother fixing their actual finances.
That is a perfect analogy. It was speculative hope replacing actual productive labor, and it haunted Sam his whole life. It appears later in his book, The Gilded Age, where the characters are just ruined by their obsession with this kind of deferred asset.
But the reality of their poverty was brutal. There's a detail in the source material that I found absolutely gut-wrenching. Marshall Clemens gets into debt, as he always did, and he loses his property.
Right.
But you have to look at who he loses it to.
He loses it to a creditor named William Beebe. And William Beebe was a slave trader.
A slave trader.
Yes. So the father of the future Mark Twain is stripped of his assets by a man who buys and sells human beings for a living. The humiliation was total. The family had to move out of their home and into the house of the druggist, Orville Grant. They were literally living on charity.
So let's just synthesize the inputs here for a second. We have the river as a global network. We have the biological blowback of the slave trade killing his sister. We have the psychological weight of this Tennessee land fantasy. And we have the crushing day-to-day reality of debt and humiliation.
Mark Twain isn't just a boy genius who popped out of nowhere. He is the product of economic precarity, the direct proximity of slavery, and the constant pressure of a system that promises boundless wealth but usually just delivers ruin.
Which brings us to the next phase of the system. Because Sam didn't stay a poor boy in Hannibal, he entered the network.
Section 2, the communication network. Or, as Powers calls it, the poor boys' college, the print shop.
I think people forget that Mark Twain was, at his core, a tech guy. I mean, print was the Silicon Valley of the 1850s.
It was the absolute cutting edge. When Sam's father died, Sam was pulled out of school. He was 12. He was apprenticed to a printer named Joseph Ament at the Hannibal Courier, and later he worked for his brother Orion. But we need to visualize what this work actually was. It wasn't sitting at a desk writing essays.
No, it was industrial labor.
It was intimate, physical contact with language. You stood at a case of type for 10, 12 hours a day. You picked up these little metal letters, S-E-T, one by one, upside down and backwards, and you placed them into a stick. You smelled the ink, which was made of lampblack and varnish. You could literally feel the weight of the words.
Powers calls the print shop the wellspring of America's distinctive literature. Why? What was it about that environment that created a writer?
Because the print shop wasn't an isolated workshop. It was a node in a national network. It wasn't just a factory. It was also a receiver. And here is the mechanism that made it all work, which I think is the most important system design feature of the 19th century. The exchange system.
Okay, you have to explain the exchange.
Yeah.
Because when I read this, my jaw hit the floor. It sounds exactly like the early internet.
It is remarkably similar in its function. It all starts with the Postal Act of 1792. The Founding Fathers believed that a healthy democracy needed a free flow of information, so they wrote a law that said newspaper publishers could send one copy of their paper to every other publisher in the country for free.
Zero postage.
Zero. So if you're Orion Clemens running a tiny paper in Hannibal, Missouri, you aren't just relying on local gossip about, whose cow died. Every single day, the mail coach arrives and dumps a sack of newspapers on your floor. You get the New Orleans Picayune, the New York Tribune, the Boston Carpetbag, the Philadelphia Ledger.
What do you do with them all?
You take out your scissors, you read through them, you find the funniest stories, the wildest hoaxes, the most shocking political rants, and you just clip them. Then you reset the type and you print them in your own paper.
It's a retweet.
It is a physical, ink-stained retweet. And just like Twitter or X, the goal was engagement. It wasn't about originality. It was about curation and amplification.
This completely changes how I view Sam's education. He wasn't isolated in some backwoods frontier town. He was reading the national mind every single day.
Exactly. He was plugged into the matrix. He was absorbing the voice of the American press, which Powers describes as slangy, vitriolic, and energetic. This wasn't the polite, proper English of the schoolroom. This was the raw, rowdy voice of a young country yelling at itself.
And he must have learned very quickly that the system rewarded a specific kind of content. It wasn't about being the most accurate reporter.
No, not at all. The metric was attention. It was about creating early viral content. Powers highlights Sam's first big hit, a sketch called The Dandy Frightening the Squatter. He published it in the Boston Carpetbag.
Even the names of these papers are incredible. The Carpetbag.
I know, right? And the story is a classic American trope. A fancy dandy dressed in fine clothes, probably from the city, tries to scare a rough backwoodsman with a fake gun or some kind of threat. And the backwoodsman just, punches him in the face.
Instant karma.
It's simple, it's violent, and it perfectly satisfies the rural audience's resentment of the city elites. But the key here is that Sam realized he could get attention, national attention, by being funny and just a little bit shocking.
And then he starts experimenting with the hoax. This is where the system really starts to shape his behavior, isn't it? Tell us about the historical exhibition.
Oh, Bonaparte crossing the Rhine. This is a classic. So Sam is running the paper while his brother Orion is out of town, and he decides to stir things up. He advertises a grand historical exhibition to be held in town. Bonaparte crossing the Rhine, admission is a dime.
And town gets excited.
They flock to the hall, they all pay their dimes, and what do they see? They see the proprietor taking a piece of a hog's bone, the bony part, and sliding it across a piece of hog skin. The rind.
Bonaparte crossing the Rhine.
It is a terrible pun. It is a dad joke that has been weaponized into a scam.
But people paid for it.
They paid. And more importantly, they talked about it. The town was outraged, of course, but they were engaged. The paper's circulation went up. This is the lesson the system taught young Sam Clemens. The marketplace rewards the gotcha. It rewards the spectacle. Truth is secondary to impact. This wasn't just a personality quirk. It was a rational response to the incentives of his media environment.
So we have the inputs, the river, the debt, the biology. We have the network, this viral print exchange. Now let's look at the interface. Section 3. The politics of humor. Because Sam didn't just write jokes, he used a very specific architecture for his stories.
Yes, we have to talk about the frame story.
The frame story. It sounds like some kind of literary term you learned in a boring English class. But Powers argues it was actually a powerful political tool.
It was the dominant interface of what was called Southwestern humor. This was the genre Sam was reading every day in the exchange papers, writers like Sut Lovingood or Simon Suggs, and the structure is very specific and very, very intentional.
So paint the picture for us. How does a frame story actually work?
Okay, so imagine you open a story from 1850. The first paragraph is written in this high, flowery, almost academic English. The narrator sounds like a professor or a judge.
Supercilious voice.
Exactly. He'll say something like, "While traversing the primitive settlements of the Yazoo Delta, I encountered a most peculiar specimen of humanity whose rustic demeanor intrigued me greatly."
Okay, I can hear the top hat in that voice. He's distancing himself. He's essentially saying, I am not one of them. I am just observing.
Precisely. He establishes a safe zone, he is the zookeeper, and then, once the cage has been built, he opens the door and lets the vernacular character speak. And suddenly the spelling changes, the grammar completely collapses.
Well, I reckon I walloped him with a hickory stick till he hollered. That kind of thing.
That's it, exactly. Now, why do that? Why not just tell the story in the redneck voice from the beginning?
Because if you just told the story in the vernacular voice, then you, the writer, would look like you were one of them. You'd be associated with the chaos.
Bingo.
The frame is a class defense mechanism. It allows the Boston reader or the New York reader to laugh at the underclass, not with them. It reinforces the social hierarchy. It says, we are safe out here in the frame. That wild animal is in the cage of the story.
It's a container for the chaos.
It is. And Powers connects this directly to the structure of the minstrel show.
This is a tough part of the history to grapple with, but we have to go there. Twain and minstrelsy.
You really can't understand Twain without it. He loved minstrel shows. He called them the genuine nigger show, and that's his direct quote. But just look at the structure of the show itself. You have the men in a semicircle on stage. In the very middle, you have the interlocutor.
The master of ceremonies. Right. And the interlocutor is usually not in blackface, or if he is, he's dressed in a fine white evening suit. He speaks perfect, pompous English. He is the frame. And then on the ends of the semicircle, you have Banjo and Bones.
The end men.
The end men. And they are in blackface, speaking in exaggerated dialect, cracking wild jokes, acting completely chaotic.
It's the exact same architecture as the literary story.
It is. The aristocrat is the frame. The end men are the vernacular. The system, the culture, it required a gentlemanly buffer to make the reality of the underclass or the racial other palatable to the elite audience. Twain spent the first half of his career mastering this frame. He became the best framer in the business. And the tragedy and the triumph of his life is that he eventually couldn't keep that frame closed.
That is such a powerful way to look at it. He wasn't just writing funny stories. He was operating a political machine that navigated the class anxieties of his entire generation.
And he was about to take that machine to the one place where the gears could really grind, the West.
Section 4. The Western Engine, Nevada, and the Invention of Mark Twain.
This is the creation myth.
So, 1861, the Civil War starts. Sam briefly joins a Confederate militia, which is a whole other comedy of errors we don't have time for. But then he quits and heads west with his brother Orion.
Right. Orion has been named Secretary of the Nevada Territory.
They land in Virginia City. And Powers describes this place not as a town, but as a satellite economy of silver, mud, and pure speculation.
It was a counterculture.
If Boston was the land of frowning Calvinist pieties, Virginia City was the land of energy, whiskey, and wind. It was built on the Comstock Lode. Everyone was there to get rich, fast. There was no past, only a speculative future.
And this is where Sam joins the staff of the Territorial Enterprise.
A journalistic counterculture. The Enterprise was a paper that didn't care about facts. It cared about quips. It was a room full of brilliant, drunk, cynical young men who were basically inventing a new voice for American journalism.
He had a feud there that I think perfectly illustrates the vibe, the unreliable versus the reliable.
Oh, with Clement Rice?
Yes. They were rival reporters, but they were also best friends and drinking buddies. So they invented this fake feud in print. They would call each other thieves, liars, scoundrels in their columns just to entertain the readers. They were inventing news to cure the boredom of the desert.
There it is again, the viral mechanic. Accuracy is totally irrelevant. Engagement is everything. This is where he finally adopts the pen name Mark Twain.
Yes. And note the name itself. Mark Twain is a riverboat term. It means 2 fathoms deep. Safe water. But it's also a call from the leadsman on the outside of the boat to the pilot on the inside. It's a voice from the edge reporting back to the center.
But the system has its limits. You can only push the fake news so far before it snaps back on you.
This is the glitch in the matrix for him. He wrote the Empire City Massacre hoax. He published a story claiming a man had gone crazy due to financial ruin and had scalped his wife and 9 children.
Good Lord.
It was gruesome. He intended it as a satire on stock market speculation, on dividend cooking. He even left clues in the text that it was fake. But the public,
They didn't see the clues.
they didn't see the clues. They believed it. They took it literally.
And when they found out it was a hoax, they were furious. They felt betrayed, manipulated.
And then he doubled down. He wrote a piece about a sanitary ball, a charity event for the Union troops, and he implied the money was being mismanaged and sent to a miscegenation society back east.
He attacked a charity during the Civil War.
He attacked a charity for soldiers during the Civil War. It was professional suicide. He was challenged to a duel. The police got involved. Our rival editor literally threatened to shoot him on sight.
So he had to run.
He had to absquatulate.
I love that word, absquatulate.
It means to leave in a hurry. He fled to San Francisco, and this is a key insight into the system. It rewarded the wildest, most irresponsible behavior with fame, but it punished that same behavior with social ostracization. That tension, I need to be wild to be famous, but I need to be good to be safe, that defined the rest of his career.
So he flees the West. He's got the fame, he's got the voice, but he's essentially a fugitive from respectability. And now he has to sell this product of this Mark Twain persona to the rest of the country.
Which brings us to Section 5, the marketplace.
This is where Mark Twain becomes a business model. And we have to talk about the gentleman publishers versus the subscription market. Because I think people assume all books were sold in bookstores in the 19th century.
Not at all. That's a huge misconception. The East Coast literary establishment, the Brahmins, the Atlantic Monthly crowd, the Longfellows, and Emersons, they sold their books in bookstores. That was the prestige market.
But there's a whole other market, a massive one.
The subscription market, this was the Amazon of its day, but it was door to door. Publishers had these armies of salesmen, often veterans, who would walk up to farmhouses in the Midwest, knock on the door, and show a prospectus, which was like a little sample of the book with illustrations and a fancy binding.
Madam, for just $3, you can own this beautiful leather-bound volume.
Exactly. These were sold to people who didn't have libraries. Maybe they owned a Bible and an almanac, and that was it. This was the market of the masses, the McGuffey reader generation. And the literary elites hated it. They thought it was undignified and vulgar.
But Twain didn't care about dignity. He cared about reach, and he cared about money.
A lot. When he published The Innocents Abroad, his big travel book about the Quaker City cruise, he bypassed the gatekeepers. He went directly to the people via subscription, and he negotiated a shark's deal. He held out for a 5% royalty.
That doesn't sound like much today.
In that market, for a new author, it was huge. Usually authors just got a flat fee, but Twain bet on himself. And because the subscription agents pushed that book into every corner of America, he made an absolute fortune. He proved you could be a literary superstar without the permission of the Harvard elites.
Oh, and here's a huge psychological twist. He still wanted their approval, didn't he?
Desperately. He wanted the money of the masses, but he desperately wanted the respect of the Brahmins. He wanted to be the jester and the king.
And that leads us to maybe the most painful, cringeworthy moment in the entire book, the Whittier birthday dinner.
Oh, the crash. This is the moment where the two systems collide head-on.
Set the scene for us. It's 1877.
It's a dinner at the Hotel Brunswick in Boston, honoring the poet John Greenleaf Whittier on his 70th birthday. The gods are there. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Oliver Wendell Holmes. These are the marble statues of American culture. They are the frame personified.
And Mark Twain, the wild humorist from the West, is invited to speak. This is his big moment. He's arrived.
He's arrived, and he decides to do a sketch. He thinks, I'm going to use my Western humor to poke a little fun at these guys. They'll love it.
What does he say?
He tells a story, a frame story about a miner he supposedly met in a cabin in the Sierras. And one day, 3 bums show up at the cabin, drink all his whiskey, play cards, and cheat him. And these 3 bums claim to be Emerson, Longfellow, and Holmes. Oh, yes. He quotes poetry from their most famous works, but he puts it in the mouths of these drunken, slovenly impostors. I am the doubt and the bell and the song, says the drunk Emerson character.
He minstrelized the gods.
That's it, exactly. He stripped away the gentlemanly buffer and dragged the elite icons into the vernacular mud. He broke the frame in their own house.
And the reaction.
Powers describes it as silence weighing many tons. Nobody laughed. One person apparently giggled hysterically out of pure nervousness. It was a complete disaster. The room just froze. Twain finished his speech in a cold sweat and sat down to 0 applause.
It was a glitch in the system. The vernacular invaded the sanctuary of the elite, and the immune system of the culture just attacked him.
He spent years apologizing for it. Years. He wrote these groveling letters of apology to the poets. He was deeply, profoundly humiliated. It shows that even though he was rich and famous, the system of cultural hierarchy was still stronger than he was.
It's just fascinating that the guy who made his fortune mocking high culture was so devastated when high culture didn't like his joke.
It's the central contradiction of his life. He wanted to be the outsider and the insider at the exact same time.
So he's rich, he's famous, but he's deeply insecure. And he's always looking for the next big score. Which brings us to Section 6, the feedback loop, and the ultimate institutional bridge, Ulysses S. Grant.
This relationship is so critical, Grant and Twain, the general and the jester.
By 1884, Grant is in really bad shape.
Terrible shape. He had been president, but then he was swindled by a business partner in a massive Ponzi scheme. He lost everything. And on top of that, he was diagnosed with terminal throat cancer.
So he's dying, and he's destitute. His family's going to have nothing.
He needed to provide for his wife, Julia. It was his last mission. So he decided to write his memoirs. It was his last campaign.
And the publishing sharks were circling.
Century Magazine, one of those polite gentleman publishers, offered him a standard contract, a 10% royalty. They were basically treating him like a charity case. They figured, he's a general, not a writer. We'll do him a favor.
And Twain steps in like a super agent.
Twain hears about this offer and is furious. He goes to Grant and he analyzes the contract as incentive architecture. He tells Grant, General, this is robbery. In the subscription market, a book like this is a gold mine.
So what does Twain offer him instead?
He makes a counteroffer that basically changed the publishing industry. He offered Grant a 20% royalty, OR, and this is the absolute kicker, 75% of the net profits.
Wait. Let me get the math straight on that. 75% of the net profits. How can a publisher possibly survive on 25%? That sounds like business suicide.
It sounds completely crazy if you're thinking like a bookstore publisher with high overhead and middlemen and distributors. But Twain was thinking like a subscription king. He knew he could cut out all the wholesalers. He knew he could control the vertical from top to bottom.
Feed the army.
He had thousands of agents, many of them Civil War veterans themselves. He knew he could send them to every door in America with a simple, powerful pitch. General Grant, save the Union. He is dying. Buying this book is your patriotic duty.
It wasn't a book sale. It was a donation drive with a book attached.
Exactly. And because the volume would be so massive, he sold hundreds of thousands of copies, the 25% profit share for his company would still make him a fortune. He arbitraged the distribution method.
And the result?
Grant died just days after finishing the manuscript. It is one of the most heroic literary efforts in history, and the business plan worked flawlessly. Twain handed Grant's widow, Julia, an initial check for $200,000.
Which is like, what, $5 or $6 million today?
Something in that range, yeah. And eventually, the royalties totaled nearly $450,000. It was the largest royalty check in history at that time.
That is an incredible business win. It feels like the absolute peak of the system. The input, the River of the War, the network, print, the marketplace, subscription, it all came together perfectly for him.
It was the peak, but, and here is the deep tragedy of it, that success broke something in Twain.
It created the feedback loop.
Public acclaim led to economic hubris. He thought he couldn't lose. He thought he wasn't just a literary genius, he was a business genius. So he started pouring all that money into the page typesetter.
The machine that was supposed to revolutionize printing.
It was this mechanical nightmare. It had 18,000 individual parts. It was supposed to set type automatically, replacing the human hand. It was the AI of its day, but it was too complex, too delicate. It kept breaking down.
And Twain just kept funding it.
He poured the grant money into it. He poured his own book money into it. At one point, he was spending $3,000 a month in 1880s money just to keep the workshop open. And this creates the trap.
Explain the trap.
The financial precarity started driving his creative production. He wasn't writing a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court or Pudd'nhead Wilson just because he had a lovely story to tell. He was writing them because he was staring down bankruptcy. He became a content mill for his own debts.
So he's running on a treadmill that's moving faster and faster, and he can't get off.
He can't. And that pressure, it finally cracked the frame story wide open for good.
Let's talk about that crack. Section 7. System failure. Because in the midst of all this financial panic, he writes his masterpiece, Huckleberry Finn.
And if you look at the structure, in Huckleberry Finn, the frame is gone.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, there is no gentleman narrator. There's no Mr. Supercilious introducing the story from a safe distance. The very first sentence is Huck speaking directly to you. You don't know about me without you have read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, but that ain't no matter.
It's the vernacular voice taking over the center of the story. The trash is speaking directly to the reader without any kind of buffer.
That's the revolution. He completely dismantled the safety mechanism of 19th-century literature. He forced the reader to see the world through the eyes of an outcast, a child.
And Powers is very good on this. The book has a problem. The ending.
The evasion.
Everyone hates the ending of Huck Finn. Jim is finally free, but then Tom Sawyer shows up and turns Jim's freedom into this elaborate, cruel game. He makes him dig out with spoons, write journals in his own blood, hide snakes in the cabin. It's just awful.
It is awful. It's cruel. And structurally, it is a regression. Tom Sawyer represents the romantic literary system. He reimposes the frame on Jim's very real tragedy. He turns a life or death struggle for freedom into a story.
Why did Twain do that? Why ruin his own masterpiece?
I think because the system reasserted itself. Twain couldn't quite sustain the radical freedom of Huck and Jim on that raft. He had to bring the manager back in the form of Tom Sawyer, to turn it all back into a farce. It's a structural failure in the novel that reflects his own inability to completely break free from the constraints of his culture. He needed the laugh more than he needed the moral truth at that moment.
And then we have Pudd'nhead Wilson. This is a book I feel like people don't talk about enough, but you argue it's the most systemic of all his books.
It is the most cynical and maybe the most brilliant. It's a book about fingerprints and slavery.
The plot is just wild.
Yeah.
2 babies are switched at birth. One is White Tom, the heir to the estate. The other is 1/32nd Black Chambers, a slave. But they look identical.
Right. And the slave nurse, Roxy, switches them in the cradle to save her son from being sold down the river. So the slave grows up as the master, and the master grows up as the slave.
And this is written during the era of Plessy v. Ferguson, right? The separate but equal laws.
Exactly. The legal system was obsessed with blood. 1 drop of black blood made you black. But Twain was showing that if you switch the babies, the master becomes a tyrant and the slave becomes submissive, purely based on how the system treats them.
Nurture over nature.
It's all nurture. And the only way to tell them apart at the end is the fingerprint, a bureaucratic, scientific identifier. Twain is exposing race as a legal fiction. He's saying it's an institutional design, not a biological reality. The system creates the race, nature does not.
That is incredibly deep for 1894. But as he got older, the system started collapsing around him in the real world, too. He went to Austria in the late 1890s.
Yeah, he wrote those essays, Stirring Times in Austria. He was reporting on the parliament there. And he saw something that terrified him.
He saw the future.
He saw the filibuster. He saw politicians throwing inkwells at each other, getting into fistfights in the aisles, screaming nationalist slogans. But more importantly, he saw the rise of modern political anti-Semitism.
He wrote that chilling line.
Yeah.
The Jew had to roast no matter which side he was on.
He was witnessing the breakdown of democratic systems and the rise of 20th century fascism.
Right.
And he realized that his humor, it didn't work anymore. You can't make a joke about a mob that genuinely wants to kill people. The frame story couldn't contain that kind of chaos.
The humor system failed him. The business system failed him. He went bankrupt. The family system failed him. His beloved daughter Susie died of meningitis while he was away on a lecture tour to pay his debts. So where did he go? What was left?
The final retreat. Solipsism.
Define that term for us in this context.
Solipsism is the philosophical idea that only your own mind is sure to exist. Everything else, the world, other people, might just be a hallucination.
So it's all a dream.
Exactly. In his final unfinished works, like The Mysterious Stranger, he has a character named Number 44, who is basically an angel or a devil, tell the narrator that life is only a vision, a dream.
Nothing exists. All is a dream. God, man, the world, the sun, the moon, a dream.
It's the ultimate opt-out. When the economic systems, the religious systems, and the political systems all failed to make sense of the suffering he saw and experienced, he decided that the only possible solution was that reality itself was a fraud.
That is incredibly bleak, but also it's sort of logical endpoint for a man who spent his entire life manipulating perception.
It is. If you build your life on hoaxes and frames and stories, if you make your fortune by sliding the bony part across the rind, eventually you might start to suspect that the universe itself is just one big cosmic hoax.
So what does this all mean? Let's try to synthesize this whole crisis in perception.
We started by saying Mark Twain was a system, and I think we've seen that pretty clearly. He was an emergent property of the river trade, the viral print exchange, and the subscription market.
He wasn't just a genius in a white suit. He was a surfer, riding these massive structural waves of change. The steamboat, the printing press, the railroad.
And the recurring architecture is what really strikes me. If you look at today...
Totally. Let's connect it. Celebrity authorship, check.
Platform dependency, check. He was dependent on the newspaper exchange. Today's creators are dependent on the algorithm of YouTube or TikTok.
Financial precarity driving content creation.
I mean, that's the entire creator economy, right? How many YouTubers or podcasters are churning out content not because they have something important to say, but because the feed demands it, because the Tennessee land fantasy of making it big demands it.
The sequence remains exactly the same. Design determines incentives, and incentives determine outcomes. Twain was designed by the frontier, incentivized by the viral market, and the outcome was Mark Twain, both the triumph and the tragedy.
It really makes you look at your own media diet differently. You have to ask, are we consuming content, or are we consuming the byproducts of an institutional design that doesn't always have our best interests at heart?
We are always consuming the system.
Always.
This has been a heavy one, but a necessary one. If you want to really get into the weeds of this, and believe me, Ron Powers goes into glorious detail about the lawsuits, the lectures, the specific steamboats, you have to read Mark Twain. A life. It's not just a biography. It's a map of the 19th century.
It is essential reading for understanding America.
And hey, this project, The Deep Dive, is free and publicly accessible. But we have our own systems to maintain. So if you'd like to support the time, the tools, and the research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
Every bit helps us keep the lights on and the books open.
And for a shorter visual overview of this whole topic, check out the mini explainer we've linked in the description.
And please tell us what systems we should analyze next. We'd love to hear your ideas.
Until next time, keep questioning the frame.
And watch out for the hoaxes.
See ya.